All right, good evening, everybody. We're meeting with Tempestt Hazel, and Tempestt is also in Chicago. And, you know, one of the things that we've talked about, we met with Dana Martin-Davis earlier in the course, and Dana talks about how there are multiple art villages and that there isn't one art world. And Tempestt does a number of different kinds of things in the art world and or art villages. So Tempestt, let's figure this stuff out. Where were you raised?
I was raised in Peoria, Illinois, which is about 3 hours south of Chicago.
And where did you go to school?
I went to school at Columbia. Actually.
Columbia College in Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
Do you consider yourself an artist?
I think that's a complicated question. For a long time, I haven't really considered myself an artist, but I'm more and more, as I have to try and convince people of what curatorial practice is, I've had to think of myself, I've had to explain it in a way, and in explaining it, I've seen the parallels of how curatorial practice and artistic practice are very similar. It's just a different medium.
Have you made art? Have you sold art of your own in your life?
No. Mm-mm.
When you were a kid, did you think you were going to be an artist when you grew up?
I thought actually I would be either a fashion designer or a filmmaker. And I don't know what happened.
All right. Yeah, no, curveball. What did you major in college?
Well, when I was in college, I studied art history and arts management. So I made writings. That was kind of my medium.
Do you think that you are now doing what you thought you were going to do when you were in college?
Yes, maybe. I think to some degree, I just didn't, I guess I didn't imagine that there would be so much to it, that there would be so many different things that I would end up doing. And I never imagined that I would have to expand my understanding of what someone who studies art history could do. I've been able to push those limits, and in the ways that I needed, and I think it's always changing. I don't think I graduated really knowing what I was going to do. I didn't have any models. I didn't know anybody that was necessarily that person that I could point to and say they're doing what I want to do. So I had to build that.
Let's talk about these things. How many things are you doing?
Let's see. Well, by day I do career development for artists with Chicago Artists Coalition, and which is developing programs to help artists sustain their practices. And then outside of that, I have 60 Inches from Center, which is an archiving project, a nonprofit organization, documentation, journalism, basically an online publication that documents artists in Chicago. So I'm the director of that, and then I also have an independent curatorial practice. So I curate shows regularly depending on what opportunities present themselves. And then I write. So I'm a freelance writer and occasionally do essays for artists, for their exhibitions, for publications. So that's really most of it, most of what I do.
So all of these things pay something, and together they add up to be enough, or almost enough, or you're damn rich.
It really depends on the thing, but they have started to pay. Not everything. When I was starting out, you just kind of take the opportunities that interest you, and it's not always about the money. It's about you have to decide what the pros and cons are, especially if money isn't involved. It took some time to figure out what opportunities I should say yes to because it's just something good that I want to be a part of. So they haven't always paid, but they've started to.
Okay. Let's talk about your curatorial practice.
Okay.
How many shows are you doing a year?
I do on average about 3 shows a year.
And for whom are these shows done?
4.
Who's your clients? Who are you doing them for? Are you doing them for you or what?
Well, what do you mean by that?
Where would the show be?
Oh, okay. So the shows are at different. I'm an independent curator, so I don't have a space that I regularly show at. I just kind of take on different opportunities as they present themselves. So I've curated a little bit of everywhere.
But is somebody coming to you and saying, Tempestt, I want you to put together a show, here's my space, I'd like to be it on some theme, or do you make up the theme, or what?
Yeah, it usually happens that way. People approach me and ask me to do shows, and I take it from there. It always ends up being a pretty good opportunity. So it keeps things interesting. Not always working with the same space. It's a whole new set of challenges, but that's April's question is Columbia College, Chicago.
All right, so let's talk about some of these shows specifically. Where and what kind of show?
So the different shows I've done them with different galleries. There's a gallery here in Chicago called Blount Gallery that I did a show at. There's this a group called the Contemporary Arts Council, who's actually a group of collectors that each year they select 3 curators to give proposals, and we pitch our proposals, and then they select from that group. So I got selected to do that. They pick a different venue every year. So I was at a space called Little Black Pearl, which is an art center that's attached to a school. And that was a really interesting way to approach it because you have to think about not only the audience that's coming in to see the work that is maybe part of my network, but then also these students that are going, these teenagers that are going throughout the space every single day, and how they look at the work. So then there's those 2. I did one at Terrain Exhibitions, which is an alternative artist-run space. So, and it's an outdoor space.
Which space was that? Where?
Terrain. It's called Terrain. It's in Oak Park.
Okay, sure.
And then
right.
With Sabina, and then what else? I did one that was with a group called Salon Series, and it's a kind of a nomadic art and dinner space. So the exhibition is always paired with the dinner, and it's centered around conversation. And then I also did one at the Southside Community Art Center. That's one of the oldest art centers in the country.
So these are all really cool shows. Do you work with artists that you've? I don't know. Let's just pick one of these. Let's pick the one for the collector group, the Arts Council.
Mm-hmm.
Did they give you some? What did you propose? Let's start with that.
So the exhibition was called The Tipping Point of Me and We, and the idea behind the exhibition was this was I was developing the exhibition when all of the Arab Springs and all of that was happening, and I was just thinking about the artists who were making work that was talking about that moment of just unraveling when things shift. So that thinking about the tipping points that we deal with, whether it's on a very local level, thinking about how things happen here in Chicago, or if it's on an international level, or if it's just within their work, or with them as artists, thinking about pushing their own bodies to the limits, and what is that breaking point. So that was the idea behind the show, and
When you proposed the show, did you recommend any specific artists?
Yeah, definitely.
All right. And then once you got this, did you add more artists to that you exhibited?
I did. So the proposal was just really to give them a sense of the types of artists I was looking at. A lot of them did end up being in the show, but I did, once they accepted it, it gave me the chance to do a bit more research and do a bit more digging. So I was able to find more artists and do a little bit of editing and really fine-tune the group.
So when you said you did research, so you how many artists were in the show in total? About.
I think it was about 10.
And how many of them did you know personally before you began the project?
I think probably about half of them I already knew.
And then how did you find the other half? Well, half you didn't know.
Well, you kind of, I think that as a curator, even as an artist, you have a knowledge of, you're constantly looking at work. So I'm constantly looking at work. And I knew which artist I wanted to, that I wanted to potentially work with. So I tend to curate along, which this seems really like a no-brainer, but I tend to curate along my own interests. So a lot of that type of work that was charged in that way, I had already been looking at. And the artists who I knew that I ended up working with, I already knew that they were doing that work. So a lot of my curatorial practice is also inspired by the artists that I know, and I follow their work, and I do studio visits with. And some of the things that they do, sometimes you end up building an exhibition around artists just because you know that they're doing something incredible and you want to give them a platform to show it. So I feel like a lot of it stemmed from that, and stemmed from a knowledge I had of that type of work because it was what I was interested in at that time.
How many of these artists that you worked with in the past year or so have you put in more than one exhibit?
In the past year, I haven't worked with this. I haven't had, of the 3 shows I had this year, all of the artists were different. But in one of the shows that I did this year, I've worked with a couple of those artists in shows before.
How far can you go as an independent curator? What happens? How many? I mean, there are independent curators who are curating museum exhibits, aren't there? There are.
Yeah. I think you could go pretty far. I think it's a matter of, and I mean, I'm feeling this out. I like the flexibility of being an independent curator. I don't have the desire to be at a museum or at a gallery or at an institution, but I am interested in those opportunities. So I think it's about trying to plant those seeds and trying to make the types of connections that will allow you to do the work that institutional curators are able to do. So, for instance, next year I'll be curating a show at the University of North Texas, and that's through, I mean, they've never invited, I will be only the second curator that they've invited to guest curate there. But I feel like those types of opportunities are out there. You just have to find them.
So wait, they found you? You found them? How did this happen?
They found me because I jury a lot of shows, and I ended up, I don't even know how this happened, but they found me and asked me to jury a show in Oklahoma City for their annual arts festival. And I ended up meeting someone from the University of North Texas during my trip there, who was also on the jury with me. So they ended up inviting me by some strange turn of events to curate, to pitch an idea, and they like the idea, so I'll be curating a show there. So I feel like those opportunities are ones that I search for and I try to seek out. So I honestly, to your question of how far an independent curator can go, I'm not sure, but I know that I like it. I know that I know that it's the freedom, the flexibility, the challenges, the blood, sweat, and tears that goes into the changes from show to show, of especially with venue, and especially when thinking of the audience for these different spaces, it always changes. So it forces me to stay on my toes, and I think I really like that and appreciate that, and it keeps me interested.
How do you find artists that you don't already know?
How do I find artists I don't already know? I think it's just through constantly looking at work. Part of the thing with 60 Inches from Center is I did that right out of school, and my thought was it would be a way for me to see work consistently and seek out work consistently. So the writers that we have are always bringing new things to the online publication, but then I'm always looking for new things for myself to write about. So it puts something new in front of me all the time. So that's just a constant. And then from there, I go see work quite often, all the time. And I listen to invitations. I get people that invite me to different things all the time, and I'm totally open for those types of things, or studio visits, or just conversations, building relationships. It's just part of being in the field, I think, and you're constantly around work, and you're constantly hearing about what someone's doing, or what a friend of a friend is doing, or it feeds itself. So that's usually how I see new work, or I find artists who I don't already know about.
Let's talk about Texas a second. Has that show happened yet?
No, it'll be happening about a year from now.
And is that mostly Texas artists?
No. So what I'm doing is I'm really interested in, again, being an independent curator. You don't get since you're not with an institution, and a lot of at least if it's a collecting institution, you have access to these incredible collections. So I've been really interested in trying to direct my curatorial practice to gauging collections. And so what the plan is for me to go there and spend a few weeks digging through their collections, a few pieces to really base the exhibition on, and then invite Chicago and Texas artists to be part of the show. But it would be me building a show based on these collection works, and then bringing in contemporary artists who are in conversation with that work.
Got it. Cool.
Yeah.
How do you charge for this kind of work? Do you charge by the hour, or is it just a lump sum fee for the whole thing, or is it always that way, or is it sometimes different?
It's sometimes different. It depends on the opportunity. Some things come with a budget, so I have to work a budget to try and figure out how I'm not only going to produce the show, but also maybe give stipends to the artists who are involved, but then also maybe give myself something. So sometimes it's a matter of negotiating those numbers. A lot of times I don't get anything as far as any kind of payment, it's just you just make it happen. So I would say about half, up to this point, I would say about half of the exhibitions that I've done have had a decent budget, but I haven't been able to pay myself. So the one in Texas will be the first time that I'm able to pay myself, which how I calculated that was by hours. So I have a set amount of hours that I plan on dedicating to it. And hopefully it won't go over, but I kind of had to figure out those numbers.
Right. Let's talk about 60 inches from center for a second. This is an archive predominantly?
Yes. I would say predominantly archive and online journal. So online publication.
And what are you archiving?
Artists. Well, it stemmed from studying art history and realizing that as much as I appreciate the artists who have who are throughout art history books and the names that we know and love, and the ones that really create the canon, I'm most interested in the artists who are not in the history books, and the ones who are doing amazing work that was really a part of a lot of that conversation, but you just don't see it. So 60 is kind of a response to that, and wanting to have an understanding of not the people who are lining the walls of the MCA or the Art Institute or have reached that level of visibility. I want to see the artists who are up and coming, the artists who are the next thing, the artists who are really the innovators and are really really on to something, but you haven't heard about it yet. So 60 is kind of a response. It's a platform for that, and so it's not just to see the work, it's also to hear the stories of those artists, because I think their biographies are just as important as the work that they make. And
are you trying to be all-inclusive?
Am I trying to be all-inclusive?
Yeah.
I have a tendency to try and be all-inclusive.
And then,
but
is it Chicago-based, or how far does it go?
It is Chicago-based, or it has some attachment to Chicago. So we also track some artists who have roots in Chicago but have moved to other places. So,
and what are you archiving?
A lot of ephemera, a lot of oral histories. We do a lot of transcriptions of conversations. We archive just anything that would really tell an artist's history or their story, their biography. Anything that would really be included in that could be documented. So we have our online component, but then we also have our analog component with the Chicago Public Library. Here at Washington, they have one of the biggest archives of Chicago artists. And so we directly feed a lot of our material into that so that they can get on top of, 21st century artists who are living and working right now, as opposed to the 80 years of history that they have of artists who have, mostly artists who have passed.
It also helps you not have to store so much, right?
Exactly. Yeah. It allows us to not need a space. It allows us to be nomadic. It allows us to have an operating budget that isn't just weighed down by keeping a space, and it allows for a certain amount of flexibility that I really appreciate.
So, and then you're doing the work with the Chicago Artists Coalition. Is that daily?
Is that daily?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's full-time.
So that's full-time. And then when do you do 60 inches from center?
All other times.
And then when do you do your curation work? When you
you know, that 25th and 26th hour of the day.
You're nuts. Okay, cool.
Well, I mean, it all ends up balancing out. The beauty of 60 is that I have an amazing group of people working with me. So I don't do it by myself. And the beauty of curating is that I am pretty firm about having time. So I don't take opportunities where I don't have at least 6 months to plan and to work things out. And that's really what makes it possible, because otherwise I would be insane.
If you guys have some questions of Tempestt, let's ask her. Do you do work have you done curation for a commercial gallery?
Yes, I have.
How's that go? I mean, similar to the story, do you get paid a fee or you get a percentage of sales? That sounds a little bit skewed, but I bet that happens. What's the norm? How does it work?
It's, you know, it's a really, as an independent curator coming into a gallery, it's interesting because I usually don't get anything from any sales. Yeah, that just doesn't usually happen.
Do you get paid?
I get paid I get paid usually through a budget if I can make that happen.
Right.
If I am resourceful enough to not spend all of my money on everything else, on production and things like that.
Yeah, I know the feeling. I hear you. All right, Tracy, go ahead and ask your question.
My question is, as an independent curator, you're the person that we all want to have know about us. So when you're talking about looking at art, we're kind of curious exactly what you do to look at art, or I am at least. And what's more frustrating than anything on earth is to see that you have curated a show that I perfectly fit into, but I had no way of knowing that that's what you were doing. So is there any way that we can keep abreast of knowing kind of how to contact curators?
Well, I think with the artists that I ultimately end up working with, it's usually not an instant thing. And as I mean, it's not that I see their work and they're suddenly in the show. It's usually a relationship that's developed. And I think that relationship is key. I usually, 9 times out of 10, am most comfortable with working with artists who I've started building some kind of relationship with, whether I came to your show or you invited me for a studio visit and I came and we had a conversation, or it usually stems from that. So I need to, there's something about exhibitions that don't give me enough information to, not as much information as I would like to, not saying that I wouldn't work with an artist that I went to their show and saw the work and enjoyed it, but I'm more likely to see the work, talk to the artist, and then go to the studio or meet with them afterwards or something. So there would have to be a point of maybe you inviting me to have a conversation with you, to like really know you. I want to know your work, but I also want to know you. And I want to have an idea, I want to have a sense of where your head is at and what you're thinking about and where your work is going or where you would like it to go. And that's what really helps me understand how you would fit into my exhibition. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that makes total sense. I think being in this for a number of years, what's difficult is knowing who you are. Mm-hmm. Like having a list of independent curators.
Yeah.
available to us so that we know that you're out there is kind of where our worlds don't collide enough, maybe.
Yeah, and that's really interesting. I think something like that probably needs to happen, but I also think that people are afraid to have that happen because for the same reason that, you know, no one goes out and really publicizes that they're a collector. You know, they're afraid that artists will end up just bombarding them. And I've never been worried about that. I've always been kind of open to, if you know what I do as a curator and you see the shows that I do and you like the work that I do, I'm totally open to having people reach out. I actually respond. Some of my best relationships with artists have come out of conversations like that. And I think just as much as I would reach out to you about what you do and enjoying your work or admiring your work, I think that it's vice versa. Artists can do that with curators as well, and just open that line of conversation. Because I feel like if you are enjoying the work that a curator is doing, then there's likely some way that you see your work fitting into that. And there's a conversation to be had there.
Absolutely. And I think a little bit of what's missing from this is so often the curator's name is not associated so directly with the shows. It's very frustrating when I look online and find shows that I find very appealing. It's often very difficult to find out that Tempestt Hazel was a curator.
Yeah.
The byline often is missing, and so it is a frustrating part of our world.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, it's pretty hard for independent curators, and some people don't necessarily identify themselves as that. But with every show, there's someone, whether it's the artist or someone that they brought in, there's someone that helped develop it and put it together. And it takes a little bit of work to find that information, but it's there.
I appreciate your honesty. Thank you, Tempestt.
Yeah.
What about, two people have asked, what about the artists who aren't local? How do you see people who might live in New Mexico or Montana or upstate New York? Or how do they see you? Or we just hope for the best?
Well, you kind of, there's so much work out there. You kind of have to hope for the best. But I think it's again, it's about being proactive. So, I always take the time to look at work that people send me. And I know that I'm always trying to raise my awareness of what's going on everywhere, but everywhere is a lot. So
totally.
It's a matter of reaching out. I think that it's hard to expect a curator to know what's going on everywhere all the time. But I also think that things come into my line of sight for a reason, and it's a slow build, but it happens. If that makes sense at all.
I know what you're saying. I'm wondering how many independent curators there are. I mean, I'm not even sure how many museum curators there are in the United States, but what percentage of museum curators are independent curators? I mean, I don't know. Let's say if there's, I don't know, I'm going to guess, 3,000 curators in the United States, museum curators. How many, that might be high. How many independent curators do you think there are?
Me? What do I think? Oh, I think there are as many independent curators as there are galleries and like alternative exhibition spaces in the country.
Oh, but I think what you're doing is more formal than that, don't you? I mean,
Well,
I mean, when I had a gallery, I would curate an exhibit, but I don't think I was really putting myself out there as a curator.
Huh, so you mean, okay, I see what you're saying. That's a good question. I scratched to find them here in Chicago. I have it's a small list. I constantly try to keep up on my list of independent curators doing things out there. But what I find is that they're usually hiding behind some other job as well. So yes, I'm the professional development person at Chicago Artists Coalition, but I'm also an independent curator. But if you read my job title or knew what I did at CAC, then you probably wouldn't imagine that I was an independent curator. And I think a lot of people are like program managers and working in the arts and doing things in the arts and also doing a lot of things on the side. I would say that I know at least like 15 to 20 here in Chicago doing a lot of work right now. But that's not, yeah, I wouldn't even know where to begin if we're talking nationally.
What kind of writing are you doing?
What kind of what? Writing.
Are you mostly writing for 60 inches from center, or are you writing catalog essays too? What are you doing?
Catalog essays. I've done several catalog essays this year. I've written for...
Those would be for hire, right? Not necessarily for projects you've curated.
No,
or both.
For hire. So I've done ones for artists for their exhibitions. I did one for a photographer, Maureen Cooper, this past year for a show that she had, and then I also did one for. I just actually turned one in for Lightwork, which is a national photography publication, writing about an artist, and so I do quite a bit of that as well, and it's usually based upon, again, studio visits and relationships that I've had with those artists and seeing that work develop over time and them asking me to write something about it based off of that.
It's usually the artist who is asking you to do this work?
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Mm-hmm. You guys have more questions? So wait a minute. April, is there such an organization as that, Independent Curator International, or did you just make that up? Wait a minute. April, I've unmuted you. Does that exist?
Yes. Yes, there is such an organization. And there are other ones also, but I believe that's a large one.
Mm-hmm.
People here in New York belong to that.
Right.
Different curators do. I mean, I don't see that. You can go and you can go to their website and you can find the different people that are members of that organization. So you can find them and you can reach out to them.
Well, then that might be a good resource to when looking for independent curators. That might be a really good resource for that. I'm not sure, and maybe you know where most of those curators are based in, like if they're mostly New York curators or if it's a national membership that they have.
There you go. Rick, hold on. Go ahead, Rick.
In Grand Rapids, Michigan, and I used to show for years in Chicago at Ann Nathan. And I'm curious if there's something that you're seeing emerging in Chicago now in terms of kind of a movement or movements. What do you see?
Do you mean as far as like aesthetically, or just like a movement as in trends that artists are doing?
Yeah, things that are, years ago it was sort of like, a lot of influence of outsider art, was a big part of the Chicago thing. Well, what do you see now? I mean, you're really in Chicago and you're seeing art all the time. Do you see any sort of particular mindset or movement or presenting itself in Chicago that's particular to Chicago?
Huh. That's really tough. I don't really see anything as far as like aesthetics are concerned. I mean, there are pockets. Chicago always has its pockets, and it all really is. It depends on who. I think Paul mentioned arenas when we first talked about
Villages.
Or the different art worlds.
Yep.
Say that again.
Villages.
Yeah.
Village.
So,
yep.
So there are a lot of different. The interesting thing about Chicago is there are a lot of different pockets, and some of it has to do with who you spend your time with. So it's hard to try and place a citywide trend on Chicago, especially with, I mean, you have as many different kinds of you have as many different trends as you do schools or programs, or it's a hard thing to put your finger on. But if there is something that I see in Chicago that has been a constant, it's not necessarily an aesthetic as it is like a drive or a way of working, and it's about realizing that Chicago isn't necessarily the city for blue chip galleries or for a lot of opportunities to get your work in a museum. So there's this real consistency with artists making things happen for themselves and really creating the art world that they want their work to exist in. So, and that's one of the things that I have seen throughout. It hasn't wavered at all. It hasn't stopped. It's something that is admirable, and it helps me rethink how I, as a curator, work in the field and what I can do. And what I can do for myself when that type of, curator at the museum, or when that's not an option, or an option that I necessarily want. So I hope that answers your question.
That's helpful. Thank you, Tempestt. Appreciate it.
One of the things I noticed, Rick, and I think it's really curious, and I don't get it, is that I think there's enough good galleries in Chicago, but I feel like there's a whole lot more good artists that don't fit in any of those good galleries. And somehow or another, you would assume that if there's plenty of good artists that don't fit, there must be something that those that do fit have in common with one another. And I'm agreeing with Tempestt. I don't quite see what it is. I see a lot of diversity in what gets shown, but I see even more diversity in what isn't getting shown.
Mm-hmm.
So, Tanya's saying that's the same thing in Los Angeles. Maybe across the board. It's kind of weird. What was that? That was me. Oops. Something just.
So to what you said, Paul, about what isn't being shown, I really kind of feel like that's where that's where I see myself coming in. Is I don't have to try to please the audience of the museum that already has its audience that it's seeking to connect with. I don't necessarily have to please or think of a bottom line that a gallery has to. So I have a kind of freedom in my curatorial practice that can hopefully, in some exhibition by exhibition, in some way, some small way, can fill that void or be able to give some kind of visibility to those artists that are being missed by the museums or the galleries. And that's really what I try to do.
Yeah, that's interesting. I just finished reading this book about David Byrne's book, How Music Works, because I assumed that there would be parallels between musicians and artists, and that's not what the book is about. But the book is good, and he does talk a fair amount about people who cleanse their souls. You know, I mean, bad people like Frick and Carnegie and those guys who would give big money to institutions of culture. You know, I mean, the same thing was like the Nobel Prize. I mean, the Nobel Prize happened because Alfred Nobel read his obituary where it said, here's the guy who invented dynamite. He created a whole lot of destruction. Not so bad that he's gone. And, you know, he said, whoa, I don't want to be remembered like that. So he created the Nobel Prize. You know, you have the Koch brothers who are certainly doing tons to, you know, subsidize, I mean, finance the Tea Party and wonderful institutions like that, and yet give money to certain kinds of museums. And as an extension of that, the money is typically given to traditional taste, like opera or dead artists, you know, like the Art Institute, because these are things that have been determined to be good, and we should show good things to the masses. We shouldn't necessarily show the masses what they want. We should show them what we want them to see. And then, therefore, they will be more homogenized, and they will have a better set. They will agree with me more. And, you know, the fact of the matter is that frequently to present an opera, you know, it might cost $30 million to present the opera, but the opera from ticket sales would only generate $500,000, so all the rest of that comes from rich guys. You know, which then leads into what Tempestt is talking about. You know, so many of the exhibits you get at so many institutions, one is you want to grow community, but two is you want to placate and appeal to the people who are paying the money, you know, giving the big dollars to the institution and what it is that they want. So the Tempestt is sitting, you know, sort of like outside of these things and is more, well, here's the question. Who are you more responsive to?
And what do you mean?
Who are you appealing to? Who is your audience? When somebody pays you, are they trying to cleanse themselves, or are they just saying, give us a good show? And what are you trying to create? You're not trying to appease the rich white guy, I don't think. You're trying, so, you know, who are you trying to make happy?
I'm trying to make happy with each opportunity. I realize that I'm coming into a space that's not it's not new. It has an audience. So that's usually the place where I start. I try to bring something that is considerate of the audience of that space already has, but then also I recognize the audience for, I try to take into consideration a lot of things, like what I've seen happening, what I think is missing, what conversations I would like to have, and then, that I think needs to be had or could be had. So the audience ends up being a mixed thing. It's who I'm trying to make myself happy, but I'm also trying to make the people who I know are coming to see the work happy, or maybe not. Happy might not be the right word.
I know it isn't. I know. I threw it out there, but there's a better word.
I'm just trying to make them think, you know, or trying to give them some new ideas, and it all depends. But it usually starts with what audience already comes with the place that I'm looking at. And then I think about what I can bring in addition to that. Because I don't want to go into a space and completely alienate the people who are there, who have been there supporting it and going to it all this time. But then I also don't want it to just be a show for them. I'm really interested in finding ways to mix audiences through art, and that's usually something that I try to do with my exhibitions as well, is to really consider who's going to be in the room and how I can push that, or how I can play with that.
I think that's a good idea. April, I want you to ask your question out loud. April, go ahead. Wait a minute. Okay, go ahead, April.
Well, I guess that I'm confused about what sorts of themes or ideas, subjects, concepts you're drawn to.
That's a really good question. I don't necessarily have a theme, or you know how art historians usually have a specialty or something that they focus on with their career. I don't limit myself to that. I can say that I tend to be very interested in history, being someone who deals with archives, and being someone who likes to work with collections. I think about history a lot. And that's usually the draw of my inspiration. So it's hard to say that there's a theme, which isn't really helpful for you, huh? I don't really have a theme, and I know that that's a hard thing to explain.
I accept that. I'm okay with that. April, do you want to follow up?
Well, I guess that, you could tell us what kinds of things you're interested in. You did tell us history. So what other kinds of things interest you? What types of artwork do you like? What are you drawn to? If you look at someone's work and you think you like it a lot, what about someone's work would appeal to you? What would be evocative for you in something?
I'm a big fan of performance. I follow a lot of performance. I'm interested in what it does and how what it does to people, what it does to dances. I'm really a big fan of new media work. I like the pushing of technology and video, and some of the things that artists are doing with that as well. But I'm also, at the same time, really interested in I've always been a big fan of minimalism and very kind of formal work, like classic color field painters or post-minimalism. I'm really a big fan of installation, like installation that just you can completely be consumed by. So artists who work with environments and try to transform space in a way that is really hard to ignore. But even in that, it's not. I also tend to my relationship to art is really, it's not just about the artwork. It's about the ideas behind it and the relationships that I build with the people who are making that work. and that I can't stress enough how important that is to me. So I've never, even in studying art history, that has always felt a little cold to me. So I haven't really gotten that much of a response or reaction from reading about art in a book, or even going to a museum and, you know, walking past paintings on the wall. It's always been about more than that. And it's really hard with all of the amazing work that's being made out there. It's hard to pin something down as being what I tend to focus on. I focus on what I have a response to. I focus on something that, like, on the work that really shakes me, on the artists who are really, like, onto something, really speak to something in a way that it just transforms you. And it's hard to put a name or a theme, or actually, like, attach some kind of characteristics to that. So I think
that a lot of procedural. Oh, I'm going to have to mute April because it makes me echo. Sorry, April. I think a lot of it's procedural, and you like the relationship with the artist and the feeling that they're pushing something, and it isn't so much about what they are, the content, as much as they're pushing the content and their immersion in it and your relationship into, you know, to their process and their ethic.
Right.
Okay.
Right. So it's a hard thing, and I know that's not. I try to. I mean, I'm in the business of with my job. I'm in the business of trying to give artists information that is, you know, things that are really clear and defined, and things that you can really use and apply to your practice. And I realize that right now I'm not really
But I get it.
doing that.
I think it distinguishes you. I think it's all good. April, do you want to say anything more there?
No, I think that helped explain things better to me. I didn't really have a sense of what she might be looking for, even the types of art that she was interested in. So I think I'm good.
Yeah, I think it's more about your relationship to your art than it is about your art for Tempestt.
Yeah, it's about both. For me, it's definitely about both. So I think it's not, like, you shouldn't, and not saying that you do by any means, April, but you shouldn't necessarily try to make your work fit into
No.
the ideas and the curator.
I wouldn't do that.
Right. So you should do what it is that you do, and just do it well as you could do it. And
I don't think we're worried about that.
Huh?
Absolutely.
We're not worried about that with April.
No.
Yeah, just, I mean, you do what you do, and I just want to hear about it. I just want to see it. I just want to know what you're doing. So that, for me, that's what it is.
Mm-hmm.
Is me seeing what it is that you're doing, and seeing where you're coming from, and how what kind of connection how you're seeing your work fitting into the world. What conversation is it having?
Mm-hmm.
And that will be a point of inspiration for me, because I don't necessarily want to pigeonhole myself into a theme. I want to be able to be responsive to what I think is the most relevant right now, and what needs to be talked about, what needs to be said, what needs to be shown. And there's no way I could possibly put some kind of put that into some kind of category, or, you know, try to hone in on exactly what that is, because it changes every day.
Good. Let's move on. Tamara, your turn. Go ahead, Tamara.
I'm in Chicago. I really, the last part of this conversation was really interesting, because That's pretty unusual that you're interested in somehow the person and the process. And
Tamara, I can't hear you well enough. Can you be louder or closer?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay, yeah, I'm just closer to the computer. Yeah, well, it was really interesting to me, that last part of the conversation, because it's a very different approach. You know, people usually are so pragmatic, and they're so, like, the thing that we said, that you, Paul, said about the museums and about the shows that are so dead, I really feel that way, and that frustrates me a lot. So it's interesting to see somebody that is using this kind of very alive attitude. I like it, because that's how artists work. I don't think we get stuck in one way of work. We really try to move it around and compare different areas to one another. So it almost feels to me like your curatorial style is very artistic in a way. You are maybe much more an artist than, you know, than most curators are, something like that. It's just an interesting thing, and it's pretty fresh, pretty refreshing. That's all I want to say.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think it's good. All right, we might be done. Anybody have more questions? We can take another if we've got it. I don't see any more. Well, all right. I think Tempestt is special because she does this differently, and because she doesn't necessarily have, you know, a clear-cut agenda. And I get kind of tired of curators who think they're artists and are trying to say something. You know, I think it's better when the curators are serving the artists and are trying to do justice to the artist's vision. And I think that Tempestt, you know, seeks to get into that dialogue that the artist has with themselves, with their artwork, and with their audience. But I don't feel like she's trying to, you know, insert herself into the equation as much as she's trying to augment what it is that artists are doing. I think that's really good. Yeah, Marion just commented that she appreciates that you aren't dogmatic. Yeah, I go along with that. All right, so Tempestt, thank you very much for being with us tonight. Thank you for explaining how you are special and how you are different. Let me unmute everybody so we can all say thank you together. Everybody's unmuted. Tempestt, thank you so much.
So much, Tempestt.
Thank you. Thank you, Tempestt.
Hey, let me stop the recording. Nice noises there.